In this lesson, we'll talk about working with solutions and projects. One of the objectives I have is to show you how to find your project that you were working on after you've closed Visual Studio and reopened it at a later date. You're going to close Visual Studio at some point. You're going to need to know how to get back to the work you were working on before you left. And we also want to talk about the relationship between solutions and projects, show you where on your hard drive solutions and project files are stored, and then finally I want to explain how to unzip source code that I provide for you on LearnVisualStudio.net. Source code intended to be used to compare the work that I did with the work that you did. So you can either copy code over, which I don't recommend. I want you to type it all in. But it would also help in debugging any problems that you might have. You can see my solution and compare it to your solution and see where the problems might be. All right, so as you can see, I have my first web app open in Visual Studio. The first thing I'm going to do is close Visual Studio and then relaunch it from the taskbar shortcut that we created way back on lesson 2, I believe. And as you'll note, we're on the start page, and I said one of the great features of the start page is that there's this recent area here. You can see I accidentally already have this thing pinned down. Just ignore that. And this recent area will have all of the projects that you are working on, and as you open or create new projects, the older projects will get pushed off that list. However, if you hover your mouse cursor over one of the project names, you can always pin it and make sure that it's on this list. And so you can see that little pin off to the left-hand side. I can press it once, and now the pin goes to a down position. That means it's going to stay put right there, and it'll never move off that list until we get tired of it or want to remove it. All right, so there are some other options in this recent area. If I were to right-click and select either open the project, of course I could just click on the link to open the project. There's also the option to remove it from the list, and finally I can open the containing folder. And what this will do is pop open Windows Explorer and show us where on our hard drive this project is stored. And I want to kind of ignore that for now. We'll get back to Windows Explorer in just a little bit and talk about where files are stored by default. However, you can either click on this link or you can select File, Recent Projects and Solutions in order to open up one of the recent projects and solutions, or you can click Open Project. If it's in neither of those lists, it opens up the Open Project dialog. You can navigate through the projects folder in Visual Studio to find the project that you're looking for and open it up. Okay, let's go ahead and cancel that. Let's go ahead and just open up my first web app, and let's talk about the relationship between solutions and projects. It's represented here nicely as a hierarchical relationship in the Solution Explorer. So solutions will own projects, and I said that a solution can contain one or more projects. Now, at this point as you're learning, it may not be obvious why you would ever want more than one project. But as you learn more about application architecture, there's a need to sometimes separate out code based on its responsibility in the application's architecture. And you would create different code modules which translate to projects inside of a solution, so you can keep them all kind of bundled up into this umbrella called a solution. Individual projects will contain the files and the assets and the settings that roughly translate into one .NET assembly. All right, so that's the difference between the two. Solutions contain projects, and projects contain files, settings, assets that will, when compiled, create a .NET assembly. Okay, so now let's go ahead and close down Visual Studio and take a look at where we can find our projects on our hard drive. Now, by default, let me go ahead and open up Visual Studio again. I forgot to show you this. By default, whenever we click New Project, either from File, New Project, or the Start page, it opens up the New Project dialog, and we have an option of where we want to store our project files, our solutions, right? And it's going to automatically put them in our user directory. So whenever you create an account on your particular machine, you'll probably give it your name or the location or the name of the computer, and it's going to create a user account. And so in this case, my user account name is Bob Tabor, and it's going to be stored in my Documents Visual Studio 2013 Projects directory. Now I can change that by clicking the Browse button and selecting a new location, but that's where it's going to store it by default. So let's find that on our hard drive. When you open up Windows Explorer from your taskbar or from the Start window, you're going to look on this PC and you're going to look in the Documents directory. And the Documents directory has been a staple of Windows operating systems ever since, like, I don't know, Windows 98 maybe. And inside of there, it's intended that this is where you store your documents for all of your applications. Visual Studio is no different. It creates its own folder called Visual Studio 2013, or perhaps 2015 if you're using that version of Visual Studio. We double click, we can see that there are a number of folders that Visual Studio needs to do its job. Here's the projects folder where our solutions are stored. And so at first you'll see a solution folder or many solution folders. Inside of the solution folder are a solution file and a project, one or more project files. The solution file has the .sln file extension. Inside of there is just a bunch of settings related to which projects belong to this solution. There's also this hidden file that you can see only because I changed my settings for Windows Explorer to show all hidden files. This is a solution user options file, and I think all this really does is it's used by Visual Studio to redraw the Solution Explorer and put it in a state of which projects were expanded and opened up in the Solution Explorer whenever you restart Visual Studio. You can ignore all of this, but we could double-click this SLN file to reopen up our solution and project in Visual Studio if we wanted to, like you see here. Okay? Let's go ahead and shut that down. Now, inside of a solution folder, there are one or more project folders, and here is the project folder. What's kind of confusing here is that by default, your solution will be named the same as your first project. And so there is a folder called My First Web App that contains a folder called My First Web App. But the topmost folder is the solution folder, and then inside of it is the project folder. And so here you can see that there are files that are roughly equivalent to the files and folders that you see in the Solution Explorer. Let me pop it open real quick so you can compare them side by side. And so you can see there's a default.aspx and a default.aspx here. There's a default.aspx.cs file, and we already talked about the hierarchical relationship there. There are these folders, app data and models, which we'll ignore for now. And then there are folders that you can't see in the Solution Explorer. For example, this bin folder. And if you pop open the bin folder, you can see that there is a .dll file. This is a .NET assembly that was created whenever we ran our application in Visual Studio by pressing the Run Internet Explorer button on the toolbar. Okay, so this goes back to what we talked about when we were trying to understand what we did in Visual Studio and what really happened under the hood. We compiled our source code into this .NET assembly. Great. All right. Back in the project folder, you can see that there's one other file that's interesting, and it's this myfirstwebapp.csproj. So this is a C# project file. It's similar to the solution file. The solution file kept track of which projects were in the solution. The project file keeps track of all of the files, the folders, the settings, the references, everything that's required to set up the project back in Visual Studio and to compile the project into a .NET assembly at some point. Okay, so if you were to look inside of it, it just has a bunch of settings that Visual Studio will read and interpret and then use, and its many dialogues and the Solution Explorer and so on. Okay. And some of these other files you'll learn about as we go through the ASP.NET series. We're going to ignore those for now. The last thing that I want to show you is how to extract a zip file that will contain the code that I give you for a given lesson. So for example, in this lesson, I've named this zip file cs-005_code. And so this would presumably be the code that I wrote in this particular lesson. And you may want this in case you want to compare the work that I did against the work that you did. And so you can open up both of the projects together and then compare the two. And so if you want to put this in your projects folder, you might have a conflict of names if you named your project the same what I named my project. So keep that in mind. You may have to change these, but if you wanted to just download the source code, you don't feel like typing it out today for whatever reason, shame on you, but you just want to look at what I did, here's how you would unzip it to the correct projects folder. So I'm going to right click and select Extract All. It's going to pop open the Extract Compressed Zip Folders dialog. Here I'm going to select the Browse button off to the right of the location bar and then choose this PC, Documents, Visual Studio 2013, Projects. So with the Projects folder selected, I'll click OK and then Extract. And after a moment or two, it will show me Windows Explorer with the solution example code, in this particular case, is what I called the solution, next to our other solution, My First Web App. And so then I can double click the SLN file like we did before, open it back up in another copy of Visual Studio. And you're probably familiar with this feature of Windows 8, but you can hover over and see two different versions of Visual Studio running, so you can switch back and forth between the two. And you can see one of them has the title example code and the other one has the title My First Web App. All right. Now if you want to extract that in a different folder, just select a different place. You might create something off the C drive, so C:/code, and then extract everything there. And so then you can open it up and compare the two, and there won't be a naming conflict between what you named a project and what I named the project in your projects folder, right? Okay, so hopefully I made everything obvious there. That's all I wanted to really say about solutions and projects, how to open up a closed project, and how to unzip a project that I give you from LearnVisualStudio.net, the code associated with a given video. All right, so we'll continue on the next lesson. See you there. Thank you.